Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, my name is Daniel Worrell. I'm a supervising attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina for the Greenville office, but also for our disaster recovery project. I'm here with Brad Peeland, a staff attorney for the disaster relief project in our Raleigh office. And we are going to present the basics of becoming a nonprofit for recovery groups. So groups that are looking, especially in the eastern counties, to assist the communities in rebuilding after Hurricane Matthew, Hurricane Florence. If those groups want to become formal, recognized by the state, and have the potential for getting nonprofit donations or grants, then this is something that you're going to be interested in. As always, just a quick warning that this is not specific legal advice. We're not telling you what to do. We're offering up generalized legal knowledge so that you can help see if you need to talk to a lawyer, if this is something you're more interested in, or maybe it's not for you. But you should never rely on anything said in a Facebook video for your personal legal situation, whether it's this video or another one. We are a nonprofit law firm that handles a wide range of civil legal issues for people who can't afford an attorney. We do also handle cases for nonprofits who are trying to start up as well. And you'll see our number repeated several times. It's 1-866-219-5262. We also have a website that is available on our Facebook page, obviously, or that you can get to. I'll provide a link at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Brad as he's going to talk about the first section.
And my name is Brad. Like Daniel said, I'm a staff attorney with the Disaster Relief Unit, and I'm going over the big basics, I guess, and Daniel's going to get into a little more of the technical stuff. We don't have that long, so we won't be diving too far into it, but the first slide we have is it's a basic slide. It's, what is a nonprofit? When I'm out in the field, I'll hear people use nonprofit in all sorts of different ways. But generally, a nonprofit is an organization that has a 501c3 status. It's a organization that's recognized by the IRS. It allows groups to solicit grant funds. It allows people to donate to your group. It allows you to, those people to deduct those donations from their taxes. And so that's the advantage of it. Just strictly a nonprofit is a legal entity. It's and Daniel will talk more about this, but it's just an incorporation with the Secretary of, or a way to incorporate with the Secretary of State. It provides basic structure to an organization and general liability protection to board members, among other things. But like I mentioned, when most people talk about a nonprofit, what they mean is a 501c3 nonprofit. And very generally, there are three basic steps you have to take to be what I would call a true nonprofit. Your first is nonprofit incorporation. You'll file a document with the Secretary of State incorporating, you'll pay a fee, and that's that. The next is obtaining 501c3 status from the IRS. Depending on how long your organization's been around, you will, I think I added extra one in there, but you'll file a 1023 or 1023-EZ with the IRS. Your incorporation documents, your bylaws, budget, and a lot of other items will accompany that. You'll ship it off to the IRS, and then it's a waiting game, depending on how long you've been around, what your budget looks like, things like that. It can take, anywhere from, 4 weeks to a few months. And I know recently, in doing some of this work with COVID, the IRS shut down their charitable solicitation line. So it was, couldn't even get up with them at one point to ask questions about filing. But that's where you get the 501c3 status from. And then the last thing you need to do in North Carolina is you need to file for a charitable solicitation license. And this is also a filing with the Secretary of State's office. It just allows you to solicit funds in the state. So if you want to for a fundraiser, filing for grants, just even having people, asking the community for funds. This is something you need, and it's a step that can get overlooked. So those are the three basic things that go into it. And I think moving on to the next slide, really the first thing I try to do when, we'll have, like Daniel said, we're a disaster group, and primarily we're dealing with, or we deal with a lot of groups, and one of the main groups we deal with are, there's a lot of community groups. I'll deal with a lot of long-term recovery groups. And so people ask me questions all the time. And the first thing I try to do, I don't know if everyone's this way, but in my practice, if someone's talking about becoming a 501c3, I try to provide, just a little pushback at first, just because, you want to make sure that, groups have thought about what they're doing. It is the reason you're filing and trying to get this sort of status is theoretically so you can obtain more money for your group. It gives you more flexibility for fundraising. But sometimes, I've talked to folks and they haven't, thought as far as that. So, some of the main questions I ask simply is, why am I doing this? And, wrapped up in this is, what need am I addressing? Sometimes you'll find, if it's not recovery groups, if it's another group, say you want to be, an organization that provides furniture to people in a particular county, there may already be 7 groups doing that. The need, now some people may not be doing it as well. You feel like you can do it better. But sometimes the need is addressed in different ways. And so it's important just to, one, think about what you're doing, but also know what else is out in the community. And a big thing I bring up, which is the last question too, is, you need to think about who's going to be helping you out in this situation. Who are my officers going to be? Who are my board members going to be? And this is critically important when you're talking about becoming, what I would call a true nonprofit, 501c3. There is more paperwork, record keeping things you have to do. You have the ability to bring more funding into your organization. But with that ability, there's more responsibility. And, a lot of times a group is only as strong as, as the officers and board members, and you want people that are really committed. And sometimes I tell people too, it's just great to have, if one of those officers or board members is a CPA or, someone, or even sometimes an attorney, even that's great too. But that's something really to think about, because I know a lot of people, it's great that a lot of people want to help, but there's just, some of those thoughts you need to have before you go about filing these documents. You do have, I'm not great on the fee numbers, but, you're getting up around, probably, $1,000 just to file things after everything's said and done. And there are requirements. But I just encourage people to think about what they're doing, why they're doing it, if there is the need, and who's going to help them out. So I know, especially in the arena we work in, disaster recovery, it can become something that it can be rewarding at times, but it also can be quite stressful too. And I've seen folks burn out, and it's something that can happen. So you just want to have officers and board members and other people in the community that are committed, and that can help make things a lot easier. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Daniel for more of the nitty gritty.
Thanks, Brad. You can tell we're getting into the nitty gritty because I've immediately supplied you with a statute number. Chapter 55A is the governing laws for any nonprofit in North Carolina. So this is just, we're not talking 501c3 yet. We're just talking, what do I do to become a nonprofit in the state of North Carolina? And the only thing, it's a really simple process. There is a 3-page printout you can get from the Secretary of State's office, 1 page of instructions, and the other 2 pages, your application. It's all available online. You do have to state who the initial members are, the initial incorporators are. Sometimes it's just 1 or 2 people, but you've got to put down that they're real people with real addresses. You need to have a registered agent. That's the person who will receive State documents, if you very unfortunately get sued, it's the person who has to be served with the complaint. And anytime you change that person or they change addresses, you have to inform the Secretary of State's office. The fun one is that you get to choose your company name as long as it's not one somebody else has. So when you put that down, nobody else can really use that name because you have it. And then also contact a business address. One of the weirder things in North Carolina, not weirder, it's actually very appropriate, is that you have to include what's called a dissolution policy. They have an example there, but the reason you're creating a nonprofit is for the purpose of being able to put things into the corporation, into the name of the nonprofit. So that could be land. Hopefully it's money that you have to assist whatever client population you have. So hopefully you do have something. But what happens if the nonprofit breaks up? What happens to that stuff? So that's what a dissolution policy is. It's a decision about what happens to the remaining assets, liquid or otherwise, that the nonprofit corporation must have. The filing fee for a 501c3, that's where we start talking with a lot more money. The filing to become a nonprofit just within North Carolina is $60. The nice thing about a nonprofit as opposed to a for-profit corporation is that the nonprofit exists in perpetuity, whereas the for-profit industries have a yearly filing requirement. When we talk about a 501c3 and the IRS, you do have yearly filing requirements. Some are worse than others, but just for the existence of a North Carolina nonprofit, file it and you're good to go. Let's get to 501c3 because that is the gold standard by and large. It's what you want to have if you're looking to help as many people as possible. I won't go over this too much because Brad obviously already talked a little bit about it, but it allows you to receive a tax deduction. So that's what you hear for any nonprofit, right? All of your donations are tax deductible. Technically, it doesn't actually apply to that many people, but it's a thing that allows particularly big donors to be able to get a tax benefit for donating to your charity. But mostly it just lends credibility. Like Brad said, a real nonprofit is one that has 501c3 status. Is not technically true, but it certainly is in many people's minds. And then it can be a requirement for grants or other contributions that will be placed upon the nonprofit. It's not necessary for all nonprofits to have one. You may wish to create a nonprofit because you're going to have land that you're going to put, houses on for people to stay in once while their other houses are being built following a hurricane. You don't need, if you have the land, you don't need a tax deduction for any contributions because maybe you don't need them. So if you're not engaging in any fundraising really, then you probably don't need to go through the process of a 501c3. But for most long-term funded community-funded organizations, it is necessary. And one of the requirements is that it is not necessarily community funded, but that it's community driven, that it's not just a slush fund for a rich family, that it's working in the community and that the community is supporting it. What corporate documents do you need? So there's two major ones. The Articles of Incorporation, you can consider that to be the Constitution. It sets out the general policies of the organization that are inviolable. You can't change the name and the nature of the business to suddenly be for-profit, or you can't take a nonprofit for the purpose of feeding the poor and decide, actually, this nonprofit has nothing to do with feeding the poor, but we're going to be an arts council. Those would be against the Articles of Incorporation, and that would just not, it wouldn't really fly. You also need a dissolution policy and a conflict of interest policy. This is really really important on many levels to make sure that the people making decisions for the corporation, the nonprofit corporation, do not personally benefit. So again, going back to a rich slush fund for some rich family, that would be the people who sit and make the financial decisions cannot be the same people that are benefiting from those decisions. In a small community, there's a lot of overlap, and that's why it takes a good policy to say what's going to happen. Also, a lot of these types of things will have married couples sitting on the board together or working side by side for these things. Having something that says what happens when there's a conflict and making sure that those two people aren't essentially one vote that just counts for two. That's where that conflict of interest policy comes in. Excuse me. What I really like are the bylaws, because I'm a giant nerd. And the bylaws are how you make things fair, how you make them transparent, and how you run a good nonprofit. It's going to set the rules for meetings, how often to meet, how long meetings should happen, what happens at the meetings. If you ever hear someone in a meeting call for a second on some motion, it's because they read Robert's Rules of Orders and they think that all nonprofits have to act that way. That is not true. That is something you put into your bylaws. How are we going to conduct our meetings? Do we need a second to accept the minutes of the meeting, or can we just do that on a voice vote? You don't have to do it the way you think it's supposed to be done, because that's how it's always been done. Every bylaw, as long as it doesn't violate the law or the articles of incorporation, is usable. They're also changeable if they're not working out. A couple things that need to be addressed in there. How do you get new officers and new board members? What is the distribution of power between the different types of people within the corporation, between the officers of the board, the executive officers of the company, like the CEO or CFO, and then just regular board members, or if you have community members, essentially shareholders who may also have power. How do you distribute that power between all of them? It can also, I think a really forgotten thing is that it can limit what the nonprofit does in violation of its initial mission. So you can have a bylaw that says no decision can affect, or no disbursement of money is allowed to go out in a certain way, a 100% to one racial group, or too far away from the county's gender makeup, if that's something you want to do. And so you have to be really smart about it. You have to argue about it for a while, but they can be really powerful if they're done right. And it's a great chance to bring everyone to the table and make them feel that everybody has a voice and therefore a stake within your nonprofit. And that's going to lead to its success. So nobody wants to build one of those from scratch unless you're me. So how do I get these documents? Do I need these documents? So the one thing is you need the documents, and you need to keep the original safe, the secretary of the board. And they have to also be available for review if someone wants to review them. A nonprofit corporation is a public corporation. And especially if you have a 501c3, there are very specific rules about what you need to make available to the public upon request. So to draft them, getting a qualified attorney is probably your first step. There are lots of law firms that make these. Legal aid may be able to help you. We might not. I never guarantee that we can help. And then there are other centers. So the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits is the gold standard in North Carolina. They help large nonprofits and very, very small nonprofits. And they are who I go to if I have a question. And then also if you are, for instance, a long-term recovery group in Brunswick County, then you might go and talk to a long-term recovery group in Onslow County or Columbus County and say, hey, what did you do? How is it working for you? And see what happens that way. Talking to people who have done what you've done for the same reasons you did it is a great way to find out what's worked and what doesn't work. And by and large, if someone's running a nonprofit, they're going to be willing to help other people trying to do the same good work. So don't be afraid to reach out to the people doing the work that maybe not in your community. I did want to mention before we got this, the sort of thing that you'll get by connecting yourself with these communities. Just by way of an example and as way of warning, the North Carolina Secretary of State's office put out a warning about nonprofits that are starting up being involved in scams. So if you ever get a letter that purports to be from an official organization like the IRS, the Department of Revenue, or the Secretary of State's office, you may want to call and check to make sure that it's a legitimate document. Apparently that is happening as we speak. And of course, we don't want you to fall into that sort of trap. Thank you very much for listening. That's all we have right now. Obviously, I could and have given presentations on this topic that are hours long. So we barely skimmed the surface of all of these things. This video is going to be made available on Facebook, YouTube. Feel free to ask any questions. You can post it here in Facebook and to let us know. I have up here our number again, and then legalaidnc.org/gethelp/apply-online is a way to get assistance over the internet, essentially. Legal aid has a lot of different funding sources and a lot of things that we have to account for, so we cannot guarantee assistance to any particular person. And then finally, stay safe, wash your hands and socially distant. And we've gotten 3 named storms so far. It's the 3rd day of hurricane season. So make sure you're prepared, that you've got everything in order. And again, thank you so much for listening.